Okay, this is chapter 9 of Zodiac, Kathleen Johns. Sunday, March 15th, 1970. In Santa Rosa, a man frightened 3 separate women motorists in an identical manner between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. At 5:10, the police stopped a man whose auto and license number matched their descriptions. He was identified as a Vallejo resident in a 1962-64 white Chevrolet. The man, about 23, was stopped on 4th Street after he had followed a woman right into the post office parking lot. He claimed that he was lost and looking for a way out of town. The police let the man go and escorted him out of town. Tuesday, March 17, 1970. A Vallejo woman was on her way to Travis Air Force Base when a white Chevrolet began to tailgate her. The driver kept looking at her and then began blinking lights, banging his horn, and tried to get her to stop. She raced ahead and eventually was able to outdistance the car. Sunday, March 22nd, 1970. Mrs. Kathleen Johns bundled up her 10-month-old daughter, Jennifer, and left her home in San Bernardino at 7 p.m. for the trip to Petaluma, a small dairy farming community where her sick mother lived. It was easier to travel at night while the baby slept. Kathleen made her way up dusty Interstate 5 and onto Highway 99 just before Bakersfield through Fresno, Merced, and Modesto, where she swung left onto Highway 132, a rarely used road. In her rearview mirror, she noticed a car she seemed to have picked up on her tail in Modesto. It wasn't as new as a 68, she told me later. It was junky. It was near midnight when Kathleen slowed to let the car pass her. Abruptly, the driver behind began to blink his lights and honk his horn. When Kathleen ignored this, the stranger accelerated and pulled into the lane alongside her 1957 maroon and white Chevrolet station wagon. He yelled through his open passenger side window that her left rear wheel was wobbling. Kathleen, who was 7 months pregnant, was very concerned about stopping on such a lightly traveled road with a stranger. It was a 2-lane road, she recalled for me later. The man started flashing his lights off and on. My car was such a clunker, I figured something was wrong with it. But I didn't stop because it was dangerous out there. I waited till I got to the freeway, then I stopped by 5. Kathleen pulled to the edge of Maze Road near Interstate 5, and the light-colored car parked on the shoulder in back of her. A clean-shaven and very neatly dressed man got out with a lug wrench in his left hand and approached her, gesturing toward the back of her station wagon. He was about 30, she said later. He seemed like a reliable person, Kathleen told me. Nobody that looked in any way freaky. As a matter of fact, I remember thinking he may have been a serviceman or something. He was that kind of clean cut. He had the tire iron when he got out. Your left rear wheel is wobbling, he said in a soft voice, leaning on her door and looking down into her car. I'll tighten your lugs if you'd like. Kathleen reached over and pulled the blanket over her sleeping baby and then tried to see out the window into the dark where the man pointed. Don't worry, he said, walking to the rear of her car. I'll be glad to fix it for you. Kathleen could hear him working on the wheel, but he was out of her view. After a while, he stood up and came around to her window. Okay, that should do it, he said, and waved and returned to his car. He went ahead and pulled back onto the freeway, Kathleen told me. She had driven only 5 or 6 car lengths before her whole left rear tire spun off, crashing and banging into the weeds at the side of the road. She turned off the engine, leaving the keys in the ignition, and got out of the car to see what had happened. Meanwhile, the stranger backed up to the front of Kathleen's car, got out, and ran up to her. For the first time, she got a good look at him as he crossed in front of her headlights. Oh no, the trouble's worse than I thought, he said. I'll give you a ride to the service station. The stranger stood between her and her car. Kathleen looked over her shoulder at the light down the road. Not more than a quarter-mile away was an Arco service station, brightly illuminated. Arco was good because she had a credit card at the time and no money. Come on, he pleaded. I'll give you a drive to the garage. It's okay. I really wouldn't have gotten in his car if I had had any bad vibes about it, she told me. I remember I told him where I was going, and I think he was going there too. Kathleen gathered up Jennifer and got into the man's car. Just as they were pulling out, she noticed that the lights to her car were still on and remembered that the keys were still in the ignition. The man smiled, went back to her car, snapped off the lights, and pocketed the keys. Then the stranger drove her away from her car, but not to the Arco station. When he missed it, I really didn't think much about it. I didn't say anything, Kathleen told me. When he passed the next exit, it dawned on me something wasn't right. As long as he wasn't talking, neither was I. We went several more exits before he got off, and then I just didn't say anything. He was doing the driving. The man started down a rocky, deserted farm road. Nothing was said for a long time. His windbreaker was open, and she could see the white of his shirt glowing dully in the moonlight. The man started to pull over to the roadside and then speeded up. He repeated this several times. Kathleen thought he was going to make a pass at her. She was the one to break the silence. "Do you always go around helping people on the road like this?" she said sarcastically. "When I get through with them, they don't need any help," said the man, his tone changing as he looked off at the dark woods in the distance. Kathleen watched the menacing dark shapes of trees and an occasional farmhouse flash by the window of the roving car. After 30 minutes, the stranger turned to look at her and said, "You know you're going to die. You know I'm going to kill you." Then he said, "I'm going to throw the baby out," Kathleen told me. "I'm getting past the point of being scared enough to pee in my pants. I'm just thinking, what am I going to do?" But real calm and cool. I figured you need an action for a reaction type thing. Do whatever it is he wanted to do. You know, sometimes you have to cry or beg or whatever. Although he drove down those back country roads for 2 or 3 hours. The man drove the frightened woman through a maze of winding lanes, rarely speaking but occasionally looking over at her and repeating either, "You know I'm going to kill you," or "You know you're going to die." Kathleen knew he meant it. His eyes, she thought, their deadpan eyes. Her head was swimming, but she tried to remember everything she could about this man during their slow drive. First, she noticed that the stranger's shoes had been shined so brightly, spit-shined, that they reflected the yellow interior lights of the car. They weren't boot types. They were like navy shoes. His general appearance, come to think of it, was navy. He was dressed in a dark black-blue nylon windbreaker over black wooden bell-bottom pants. The black, thick-rimmed glasses he wore were held firmly in place by a thin band of elastic around his head. His chin was traced with scars of some past acne infection. His nose was not especially small, she told me. His jaw wasn't weak. He wasn't a weak type of person, and he didn't have a heavy forehead. His hair was brown, worn like a crew cut. That's probably why I thought of a serviceman. He wasn't real big, weighed about 166. Kathleen herself was 5'9" tall. I got the distinct impression that he might not be aware of what he was doing. I think he could even be the man next door and might not know it was himself. Obviously, he was sick. There was a full moon out, and it cast a glow on Kathleen's blonde hair and gray eyes. She took in everything she could. Her car was an American make, lightly colored, a late model 2-door with old California license plates, the black and yellow kind. The car's interior was messy, with papers, books, and clothes strewn about the front and back seats, and even on the dashboard. The clothing was mostly a man's, but mixed in were some small t-shirts with patterns, such as a child aged 8 to 12 might wear. He is so neatly dressed, thought Kathleen, and yet the car is so messy. On the dashboard were 2 colored plastic scoring pads. House stuff in the car, stuff that didn't belong there. Next to the pad, she could make out a black 4-celled flashlight with a rubber grip. A sporty console-style auto-transmission gearshift box was between the 2 black bucket seats, with a special built-in cigarette lighter on its right side and an ashtray at the front end. It seemed to be part of the car. The stranger continued speaking in a monotone with no trace of accent. No emotion, Kathleen told me. No anger, no kind of emotion. Nothing. The words just come out. He didn't speak abnormally slow, but very precise. It just came out. Period. What he was going to say, it just had no feeling. I couldn't handle it anymore, so I decided the next time he came to one of those Hollywood stops, not a complete stop, that he made at the different stop signs, I was going to jump out. Suddenly, the car came to a halt. The man had inadvertently driven up a freeway off-ramp. Kathleen scooped up little Jennifer and jumped out of the car, dashed across the road, and leapt into an irrigation ditch surrounded by tall grass in the middle of a field. It was all wine vineyard with a little gully, and I just laid as flat as I could. She held herself on top of Jennifer to keep the baby from making an outcry. Her heart pounded in her temples. Her breath came loudly and rapidly. The car did not move. She could see the man now. He had a flashlight and was playing it about the field, searching for a glimpse of her and the baby. He called out for her to come back. There was silence except for the sound of crickets. The man stepped forward, swinging the light. About the same time, Kathleen told me later, this old semi-truck was going on the freeway. His lights must have flashed on the man because the driver just stopped that big thing on a dime and jumped out and yelled, "What the hell is going on?" And this guy jumped in his car and split. The stranger's car accelerated down the black road. A trail of gray dust spiraled behind the vehicle. The driver of the truck came toward Kathleen and she panicked. Not another man. He started coming down the hill toward me and I just started blowing it. I made him wait until a lady came along and I rode with her. But then, when I got to this little one-horse town, she let me off in front of the police station and I went into this dumpy little office where there was just this one old man, a sergeant. I told him my story and he went kind of pale. I guess things like that don't happen every day around a little town. Well, he got a form and I'm giving him a detailed description of the man and his car. As she and the policeman talked, Kathleen's gaze wandered up the wall where the cops kept their wanted posters. Her eyes locked on the bulletin board. She gave a start and let out a scream. "Oh my God, that's him right there." On the bulletin board was the composite drawing of the murderer of Paul Stein, a composite drawing of Zodiac. The sergeant panicked when I told him it was the guy on the wall, and he wanted to get me out of there because he thought the man might come back and try and do us both in. He was the only one on duty, and in fact he took me over to a diner that wasn't open. He had the owner open up so I could sit there instead of his office. I was kind of ticked about that. I guess he didn't feel safe with me being there. "You are the police." I sat there in the dark cafe and explained to him where my car was, Kathleen said. "By the Arco station, and I guess the sheriff went out, but he radioed back to say there was no car. They kept searching, and then just a while later it came over the radio that the car had been found on this other road, but all burned up. In order to move Kathleen's car to Bird Road at Highway 132, it was found the stranger actually had to put the wheel back on the car. The inside was totally burned. I went to the junkyard because all my kids' stuff was in there. I wanted to see if there was anything I could salvage. There wasn't. The inside was just gutted." In the days following the attack, Tashi sent Kathleen a series of photos of suspects. The ages were 28 to 45. I asked her about this later. "Yeah, he sent them through the Stillwater County Sheriff. But I felt that the suspect was younger and not in those pictures. If I saw him again, though, I would instantly recognize him. The fact that the murder attempted on Kathleen and her baby occurred near midnight on a weekend at the time of the full moon, and that the man was dressed in navy garb and wore a crew cut led me to believe that she had escaped from the Zodiac killer. Added to this was the fact that stranger wore dark-rimmed glasses and spoke in the monotone voice that all the surviving victims had mentioned. If it was the Zodiac that she had escaped from, then Kathleen had seen him up close and without a disguise longer than any of his victims, and she had lived to tell about it.